All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another Future Focused weekly update. I'm your host, Christopher Lind, and if I am doing my job well, I am hopefully keeping you 10 steps ahead of what's going on at the intersection of business, tech, and people. I hope this week, for probably a lot of you, at least based on my listener base, probably was a shorter week this week with Labor Day week or weekend last weekend and all that good stuff. So anyway, hopefully the week has gone well and you're all caught up. Thanks to all of you who watch and listen, and thanks for your continued support. If you find value in this, please like, follow, subscribe wherever you're consuming it from, and share it with somebody who may benefit from it. And if you value my content, if you appreciate it and you want to say thanks by virtually taking me out for coffee or lunch, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Christopher Lind and you can say thanks financially. It just helps support what I'm doing here, and it is greatly appreciated. But all that to say, I've got a rundown this week of some pretty big technical changes I want to talk through, and then a recent research report. So let me get through that. I will do my best to make time for a highlight of a successful thing that happened as well. The first one, just so you have an idea of what to go, you can look at the show notes if you want to see exactly where the breakdown is. I'm going to start off with this MIT report that is making headlines all over because it's making claims that 95% of 95% of AI projects fail, which it's not that I'm questioning their data, but I want to give some context. There's also some things in there that I think actually nobody's paying attention to, but really should be. So I want to talk through that. And then I'm going to talk about some of the big updates to really, it's more about model changes and model enhancements. So what's going on in the generative AI space that might actually have some big implications for organizations and individuals alike. I'm going to try and break down, really, there's a company called Liquid AI and some of the interesting work they're doing. But then also DeepSeek 3.1 came out, which made some headlines. And I want to talk about kind of what that all means and where that could go, just to kind of help people understand where the AI train is moving. Not that it's going to radically change things. Well, it might. So anyway, more to come on that. And then last up, I'm going to talk about what's going on with Google Mangle. If you have not heard with Google Mangle, again, not going to get super deep in the technical stuff, but help you understand why things like Google Mangle's latest release is pretty groundbreaking and why it's going to have an effect on organizations. And you should just know what's happening with this. And then, like I said, if I have time, I'll get to a positive update, good use of AI that I've been working on recently. So with that, okay, let's get started on the MIT report. It's actually out of MIT's media group called NANDA, I think is it. It's a Project NANDA. Anyway, they came out with this. It's pretty long. It's 26-page report on kind of their findings with the enterprise and how are people doing with generative AI and the headlines and all this other stuff. And the one big headline everybody's talking about is the fact that 95% of AI pilots fail. As you can imagine, that's making its runs and all this other stuff all over the place. The thing is, when you dig into it, and even the report doesn't necessarily frame this up as AI is failing, but of course that's what is going to be broadcast. So if you hear that, I would encourage you to not react to that. But also, even though I do think there's some merit to the fact that, yeah, a lot of specialized AI projects are failing, I see headlines where that's interpreted as, see, AI doesn't work. It's not, going anywhere, all these other things. That's really not what the data is saying, and even what their findings are saying. So once again, headlines matching the research, even the research being taken out of context, and then even some of the findings of the research can be challenged because they lack some of the content text. Now, to be clear on one of the things, there's also two big differences in what they found. So when they looked at the adoption, they broke it into two different categories. One was general purpose LLMs. So this would be something like if you have a Copilot or a Gemini or something like that, versus an embedded task specific generative AI. So if you got really surgical with the generative AI, what did you see? So, if a company kind of said, hey, we're going to move forward with, we're going to experiment with, I don't know, Google Gemini. Well, that was significantly higher in terms of success. Now, again, it didn't get into the details of what their success measures were, other than to say, the executive sponsors that, obviously weighed in on this said that they had some sort of notable improvements on what they were doing. And they only did include, larger organizations. So of course there's all the like, well, what about this and this and this? But if you look at the general purpose LLMs, the broader ones, that one had like a successful implementation rate of about 40%. It was this specialized task-specific Gen AI that had the 5%. Now, even looking at their answers and kind of some of the conclusions on this, I think they had some really good points that actually contradict some of the headlines you have, which is, everybody's talking about AI is going to replace everybody's jobs in the next 3 to 5 years. And this pushed back and said, not at this pace. If we can't even have successful pilots in specialized AI greater than 5%, the mass layoffs aren't necessarily going to be a big threat. But where I would push back on their findings on that is the fact that it's not what AI can do, it's what executive leaders believe it can do. And this actually supports what I've been saying for quite a while, that I firmly believe companies are over-indexing on these layoffs, and then they're going to have to make up their losses, or the poor people left behind are just left scrambling, which is in some cases even more dangerous because it can create the perception everything's fine as these people are burning the midnight oil, trying to make up for things and make up for the failures of these specialized AI tools. And then either they quit, or the fact they're moving so fast, they can't actually keep pulse on what's happening as these AI tools are trying to help them. And they're just introducing risk after risk after risk. So even these general tools are going to cause major problems. Add on top of that, because of the fact it wasn't done with specialized surgical care, when it blows up, there is no documented history of what went on. There's no, and you could go, well, isn't it in the LLM? Yeah, if you want somebody to sit and try and comb through it with a fine-tooth comb to find it, but there's going to be no consistency because it's people just with general tools trying to make things work. This actually reveals a huge risk to organizations, especially when you take it in conjunction with some of the data I'm going to talk about later. But all that to say, if you're an employee going, one, I believe that, every job is at major risk here in the next couple years. This does push back against this. This should also push back against some of the leaders who may be leaning into this going, boy, maybe I should get rid of all my people because AI is super effective and can do the work of any individual. The data says otherwise. The data says otherwise. Now, where I want to challenge some of this is I would have loved to dig deeper into things because I am almost 100% confident in the 95% of cases of failed AI pilots. I can almost predict how they went. I truly can. And that's not me saying, oh, I guarantee this. No, but these surgical ones, we aren't doing a good job with it on the general level. The number of specialized projects I lean into where even basic questions of like, what does good look like on the other side? How confident are we in the data of how this thing works today? How are we going to measure if it's actually driving success or not? Like some of these foundational questions, many of them are unanswered as things are moving forward, which is a recipe for disaster. Now, what I can tell you is when you do it right, that 5%, it's not going to jump to 100%. But it is possible. What I would challenge in here is it is absolutely possible to see a much higher success rate than 5%. And I know that because my success rate on task-embedded task-specific Gen AI is much higher than 5% success. So you can go, well, maybe you just got the luck of the draw, or maybe just these other things. I guess that's some pretty good luck that I'm having then if I'm taking that path. And so all that to say, don't let this data shy you away from, okay, the models aren't ready to handle the task specific or embedded stuff. It's actually really capable of it when it's approached correctly, which is, I talk a lot about the fact that it's about the right people in the right roles using AI on the right things, overseen by people who know what they're doing. Many people are trying to skip those steps, not let alone what I said just a minute ago about, mapping out what are you trying to solve, like all these other things. So because those things are often being skipped, am I surprised by a 95% success rate or failure rate? I'm not at all. In fact, I would love to see, can I actually see those 5%? NAMDA team, if you have a chance, reach out to me. I'd love to see the 5% and actually see how many of those are actually successful. And I would bet if they are successful, one, they've checked these boxes that I've described. Two, I would bet even within those 5%, if you were actually to dig a little bit deeper, they may not be quite as successful as they show up on paper. All that to say, I hope that brings some calm to people, around like, oh my word, AI is on the verge of taking over everything. And it's not because the models can't perform. That's the thing. It's not because the models can perform. They didn't mention that in here, but you'll see later in the data, with the failure rate is largely due to a lot of the things I just described. And it's still very fragmented. Even within organizations, even when they try and do a specialized AI build, they're battling against other AIs. That's the thing. AI is actually successful in some of these task-specific things. Through my experience, it's just that like a lot of people are like, they've got their own ways of doing it with their own little AI tools, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute. But I hope that gives some calm to the fact that, AI is not peaked to take over everything, overnight here anytime soon. But business leaders need to be aware of this because they're spending billions of dollars on these AI pilots and they are failing catastrophically. So when I make posts, when I talk about this stuff and say, slow down and do this correctly, if you don't, you might as well dig a hole, take all the money you're planning for that specialized AI pilot, pour it in the hole, pour gasoline on it and light it on fire, because you've got a better shot of making money through that approach than you do, or being successful than you do actually just running forward with these pilots. Now you may say, well, Christopher, but these general ones seem to be doing pretty well. Correct. And while they don't go into the detail here, I would say if you were to dig into the general purpose LLM success, if they were to say, but how do you quantify that and how do you scale the success you're having with that? It would be almost impossible to answer that question because that's all being done on a general level. It's being done generally. We're seeing like, hey, we're assessing, are people finding value and seeing success with these, general models, and people are going to say yes, and things probably to some degree are improving, but it's not repeatable. It's not something you can continue to repeat. So even with this MIT data, there's a lot of nuance. Now, the frightening statistic that I think should wake up everybody and every business leader or everybody who may look at this data and go, see, if you're a business leader, you might go, see, this is why we're not jumping in with AI. If you're an individual, you might go, see, this is why, I don't need to get on the AI train. Well, the next data point is that 90% of employees were using LLMs on the regular. Only yet contrast that with only 40% of the companies interviewed had an approved AI tool. So this opens up a whole lot more risk here, but also to individuals who may be AI resistant, who may be kind of one of those ones who are hanging on and going, I'm not going to adopt or use these AI tools. you are very much in the minority now, and that is a huge risk. I've been saying since Gen AI came out that it's not going to be people who, it's not AI necessarily that's going to be a threat to people. It's going to be people who figure out how to use AI. And this adoption rate now is up to 90%. I mean, that's high. Now, granted, I can tell you from some of the work I'm doing with the AI effectiveness report right now, just because 90% of people are doing it doesn't mean they're effective with it. So if you're somebody who's maybe a late bloomer on the AI front, it's not that you're cooked, but this data should really point out to you, oof, like I should at least figure out what I'm doing with these things if you're in that category of not. Now, just because you're using the tools, I will tell you right now, based on my interactions, the data that I have on this stuff, based on what I'm just seeing in general and from other reports, a lot of what's happening right now is not effective use, which, okay, so take comfort in that there's still room for you to grow unless you're in really the front end of the curve of really disciplined AI use. There's room for you to grow. So good news again for everybody. Now, this should have business leaders. This stat should have business leaders losing sleep at night. I mean, absolutely losing sleep at night. This means that the use of just completely unoverseen, unregulated, ungoverned, undocumented AI is massive. Because I bet if I were to dig into the 40% of companies who have, the LLM approved, like they have approved AI tools, I bet if I were to dig into those, the people in that 90% using LLMs, many of them are not using the company approved ones. So one, if you're a company and you have not moved forward with like a general tool like Gemini or Copilot and are not working actively to try and like encourage people to be doing stuff to some degree on your company approved tools, I would get on that. But two, this goes to what I've been saying for a long time, that this is a very human change, and ineffectiveness with your people in AI is going to cost your company big time. I mean, big time. So if you're not taking seriously assessing, hey, do my people in general know how to use AI? Do they know how to be effective with it? Do they know the guardrails, what's acceptable, what not? And yes, some of that should be, general training on how to use the tools, making sure you have clear compliance frameworks for what's acceptable, what's not, that you have, IT policies in place and practices in place to limit the risk. That's all good. However, you also should be really, really paying attention to, are we actively like assessing and developing and growing our people with AI? Because if we're not, this is a huge organizational risk. I mean, this is massive. I saw this and went, holy moly. Companies I knew adoption was moving quicker than many anticipated, but there is this kind of factor of like a lot of people, brag about their AI use, or sometimes it's taboo. So you're never really sure where it's at. This data was a bit staggering. This was a bit concerning that, less than 2.5 years in, or just maybe over 2.5 years in, we're this far with adoption. So this one further, if you're somebody who's like, I think this AI bubble is going to pop, like it's going to pop, yes, but not like it's not going away at all. Now, it was interesting digging into like, okay, where are they using it and all this other stuff. And if you look at where it's being used, it's largely right now being used for, outbound email writing, content creation, doing like analysis of data, automating some of this stuff. So really where a lot of the work right now is being done is in very foundational basic stuff. If today. So lots and lots and lots of room for us to continue increasing our utilization. That's why I say, don't look at 90% and go, oh, we've already fully cracked and, succeeded with AI adoption. Well, its previous statistics contradict that. Then when you actually look at the use cases of how it's being used, you quickly go, okay, well, there is still tons of room to do more with this. Then when you get into some of the details of like, why are they failing? I mean, again, it just continues to be human related. The leaders aren't really bought into it. There's a lack of sponsorship. There's a lack of understanding at senior levels. Poor user experience because the person buying the tool didn't take the time to really understand how the work got done. There's a resistance from people who are naturally afraid that AI is coming for their jobs because companies everywhere are laying people off in double digits. So all this stuff that we go, well, if we can just, I mean, honestly, in many ways, I look at the capabilities of the models, which you're going to see, I'm going to talk about when I talk about some of these latest model releases. It's almost like they're irrelevant when you look at what actually is holding things up, making things fail, all this other stuff. It is very much human transformation going on. I mean, most of the models are Ferraris for what most people need as a daily driver. And that's what is really lacking is as these AI models just continue to explode in capability, people just aren't keeping up with it. So hopefully that helps, kind of like challenge some of this stuff. But again, the complex stuff that's happening, it's not adopting, and it's not because the models can't do it. And so, I mean, as a recap of all of this stuff, just briefly, like if you're a person, take seriously AI and focus on like how to use it well in more than just repurposing your content or dumping a bunch of stuff in and then asking for it to help summarize it type of a thing. Like that can be a good use, but there's a lot more room to go. And if you are somebody who adopts and adapts to that capability quicker, you're setting yourself up for success. So there's still plenty of runway, still plenty of room, and take comfort in knowing that AI companies are not ready for AI to just wipe out their workforce. But don't think that doesn't mean that they might not still just off their assumptions. To the business leaders, you need to take seriously what you're doing with this. I mean, you have no choice but to move forward with this, and you got to pick up the pace, and you got to pick up the pace around more than just, hey, did we implement the latest model? Like, there's a lot you got to do with this. And so, and you're opening yourself up to tremendous risk when you ignore the really kind of traditional things that ruin projects. Except the problem is the risks are now greatly amplified with AI. And so if you're not taking that seriously, you are knowingly and willingly opening yourself up to tremendous harm. And I think the other thing I would say is, if you think AI is not all over the place, running rogue in your organization right now, this report should just rock your world and make you go, okay, we got to do something. And please do not let it be, well, let's just try and ban AI tools. You're not going to be able to. It's far too integrated into everything, and people already know how to work around it, and they will. So with that's hopefully breaks down some of this. I may revisit this at some other, point and take a deeper look at some of these. But that hopefully helps recap for you what this MIT report said and what to do with it, whether you're an individual or a business leader. Okay, let's talk about some of the big model developments and not necessarily go through a technical breakdown of what these are. But the two models I want to focus on is DeepSeek version 3.1 that recently came out. And then there's this company called Liquid, and they recently released 4.0, I think was, one of their big things. They've got a couple different things. But anyway, let me address the DeepSeek one first. I'm trying to figure out which one I want to hit first, but let's talk about the DeepSeek one first. Now, if you hadn't heard, DeepSeek, of course, shortly after GPT-5 released, it announced that, hey, we came out with theirs as well, 3.1. Of course, then all the headlines are coming out. They're coming for it. It beats GPT-5, this and that, and all this other stuff. Let me say, from a technical standpoint, and like I said, I'm not going to go into a complete breakdown of the technical differences. But what I will say is DeepSeek 3.1 is not. I mean, it's not one of the frontier models in terms of the exact same thing. So it's token windows, like the amount it can take, it's not as high. Its open weight, its ability to handle things is not quite there in terms of its complexity, but it is a really powerful, notable model. And so, going back to what I said before, where some of these other ones, they're like a Ferrari. Yeah, I mean, DeepSeek is really competitive. And some are even saying in its coding capability, it can go head to head with GPT-5 and Cloud. I think it actually outperformed Opus 4.0. So it's legit. I mean, it's a very legit model. Now, you may say, yeah, but it's from China. Well, okay, but I'd really challenge you to, look at why are you so concerned about that? Now, to be fair, I think it is something that you need to pay attention to. Hang on one sec. So, I mean, yes, I understand where people's concerns about it are. Now, granted, where I would say, and this is one of the biggest things that is significantly different about it, is because it's open source, you can actually download this thing and install it locally. Now, you're not going to install it on your local computer. I mean, well, you might if you have like a server at your house or something like that. But if you have a small business, I mean, you can run it. It's 700 gigabytes for a local download. So it's actually possible to run this thing on-prem and be able to do all of this stuff. If you have the technical know-how. Now, I know many companies may not, but this is significant as we start to see where this really challenges things, is that open source models continue to demonstrate how capable they are, which challenges this whole closed model like OpenAI and Anthropic that really are banking on people continuing to pay the licensing for their APIs. So if you don't know how some of this stuff works, if you are working with, say, if an AI tool that you've built or you've bought is tied to OpenAI, every time it's being used, there's an API call that's happening that's, tapping into ChatGPT, and then, basically you're paying for the number of tokens that are going in and out each way. And you can see the pricing on all this stuff. Obviously, if you have a local model that you build and set up locally, you're not paying for those fees, which is very appealing to a lot of companies. Not only that, it also does give you a little more license to control, what is and isn't allowed, since you can, dig in and make some tweaks and other things. Where I think sometimes when I see this stuff, to security folks or folks who may go, oh, great, so I can download this and then I have total control over the model. No, I mean, yes, it's open source and that there's more that you can do to customize and work with it, but still the model was built and trained the way it was built and trained. And so I would say you still need to be careful about like a downloading, installing locally and assuming you're safe, because no, it's still connecting out to different things. The chances of you actually going through and looking at all the code to make sure there's nothing malicious hidden in it is slim to none. So I think there's going to be a lot of organizations that, despite the fact they could download, say, a DeepSeek 3.1, and maybe run it locally for security reasons, for just the, scalability and comfort and all this other stuff, not having to risk some of these things, they may not necessarily jump there. But this actually does challenge the idea that we are going to be locked into an OpenAI or Anthropic world until the end of time. Or if you're a small organization that maybe has some technical know-how that goes, we don't want to be beholden to one of these companies and, locked in on the costs, you don't necessarily need to be. Like I said, you still are going to have a lot more technical know-how to run this stuff. You can't just hook up an API and do some work in that sense, but you could, in theory, download a very capable model, with this and do something on a much greater level. So I think it's worth noting that this is changing the game of what companies may do, what individuals may do. I think this opens all sorts of other risks too, because it's like, well, you can have this kind of capable model running locally where it's open source and you can kind of do what you want with it. I mean, this further goes back to the train's left the stations. We're not rolling this thing back. But I think this opens up a lot of flexibility. I think it also torpedoes the whole idea that, American tech is going to be something that the whole world's just going to purchase. And, that's going to be our whole economic future. Not when a couple days after GPT-5 releases, DeepSeek releases a version that, no, it's not head for head, but for what the vast majority of people need, it's still overkill. Honestly, DeepSeek 3.1 is still major overkill for what most people would need. So this is pretty significant. Now, alongside that, and if you want to check it out, like I said, if you want to dig deeper into, exactly how it goes head for head, if you want to look at all the benchmarks, you can do that on your own time. I'm not going to do all that. But I think the biggest thing was, this ability to download. Oh, how did I almost completely forget this? Here's the other one, though, that really is going to disrupt things. Even if you're not, even if you didn't want to do it locally and run this whole thing yourself, right? Just like OpenAI and other ones, you can hook up APIs to DeepSeek itself, right? You can do it that way if you don't want to deal with all the hassle. So don't think that if you want to explore or experiment with DeepSeek, you have to run it locally. You don't. But what's interesting, and this is where it's probably got some of these other big models shaking a bit, is the fact that the cost of DeepSeek is, GPT-5 did a lot to disrupt the whole cost thing because it was like, hey, look how much cheaper we are now. DeepSeek blew that out of the water. What would have normally cost, because Claude, I think, is still the most expensive one. And so Claude is like $70 a task, for a typical developer task. DeepSeek's $1. And that's if you're using like the supported, API version of it. So I think ChatGPT took it from like 70 down to like a tenth of that, like to $7 or maybe $10, something like that. I'm just swagging numbers, so don't get all over me. So even GPT-5 was a pretty big hit to Anthropic from a cost standpoint for a great thing. But then like DeepSeek comes in and is like, yeah, hold my beer, which further drives, okay, look, this is going to drive adoption further. This is going to drive down costs, all this other stuff, which is going to lead to some poor decision-making. But again, this is really where things are going. It's going to just continue to get cheaper, more readily available, more accessible on a local standpoint. And if nothing else, one, all the more reason people, you need to make sure you know what you're doing and are growing with this. And organizations, you need to be taking this seriously and really investigating, how you're making the most of this kind of stuff. Because if you don't, people are just going to figure this out on their own, and you're going to open yourself up to a ton of risk. Now, going back to accessibility, this is where the Liquid.ai came into play. Now, if you're not familiar with Liquid.ai, they're trying to do something pretty radically different. Largely, if you look at a lot of these models, even though they're starting to get into thinking models and things like that, they're still largely built on the same AI architecture. So while they're continuing to improve and enhance and things like that, it's still kind of enhancing largely the same kind of stuff. Liquid AI is really trying to change the way they're doing things. And they call it liquid foundation models. Of course, they're liquid AI. So, you're probably not going to find LFMs, but get ready for the 3-letter acronyms to keep flying all over the place because they're everywhere. But they are actually trying to re-architect this. Now, the reason I say this is this goes back to, yes, you see DeepSeek come in and go, hey, look, like we can do all this and the cost is down and it's available here. And again, that's these iterative designs on these LLMs, large language models, and LTMs, large thinking models, I think is the term they use for like the advanced thinking capability. But that's still largely iterations on the same stuff. You have people like Liquid AI coming in and they're going, we're like re-engineering the way the models work. Now, if you were to look at their latest models here, you will notice the benchmarks are much slower. They're not comparing themselves to GPT-5 or anything like that. They're comparing themselves to, Llama, Microsoft's Pi, Stable, like some of these open models, but then also like smaller models. Now you might go, oh, so smaller, less powerful, less capable, all this other stuff. No. And what's fascinating about what they're doing here is their models are extremely powerful and can be run literally locally on a mobile device with almost no impact to battery performance, memory, anything like that, which is absolutely mind-blowing. So I watched a whole thing on Liquid's new AI model and what it's bringing to the table. And again, if you were to do a side-by-side benchmark against one of the frontier models, you might go, why is this such a big deal? Well, when you look at the efficiency of these models and how capable they are, you start to realize, like, wow, it's not just the OpenAIs, Anthropics, DeepSeeks, Google Geminis that you should be paying attention to. There are all these other companies out here really doing some incredible changes to what's possible in different ways. And if you really look at the way their model performs, you will see, this thing operates and kind of blows some of their other competitors out of the water. And it can be run on just these very small local devices. Like you can run it very easily on a mobile device and have a very capable, robust model capable of doing a lot of what you're seeing on these big models. Now, again, you might go, well, it's nowhere in comparison. Yes, that's true. But when you go back to what I was saying, based on the MIT reports, the vast majority of what people need to do, what they are doing, what they actually benefit from is nowhere near what these frontier models are doing. Like I said, the frontier models are largely like a Bugatti for the average person. You don't need that kind of horsepower. You don't need that kind of capability. Like the vast majority of people would be more than equipped. Literally more than equipped with what Liquid Foundation is doing. And now that can be run on an outdated old version of a smartphone type of a thing. Now you may go, well, so like, what does that mean? Well, like I said, DeepSeek is changing things in terms of driving costs down, making powerful models much more localized. This takes that localization even further. But then when you start to think about the fact that these things can run independently, completely agnostically on a handheld device or wearable device, you start to put the pieces together of AI is literally going to be everywhere, which for companies, this should open the doors for you as you start to think about innovation and what you might be able to do and how you might be able to enhance, improve, all this other stuff with the work you're doing. Like that's where when people ask me, where should we be using AI? I'm like, that's the wrong question to be asking. At this point, it's a matter of what are you trying to do? Well, then we got to figure out what models are best suited for you. What are your real problems that you need to solve through? Because really now it's not science fiction to think you might have a tiny little pair of glasses that can run all the capabilities of what a lot of what we're seeing today can do and have it be completely like untethered, literally untethered to the internet, untethered to all this stuff just because of how powerful these models are. So, if you want, go check out liquid.ai. It's really interesting to see where they're going with this. But I wanted to include it alongside DeepSeek to also help you as an audience realize like there's a lot more going on than what you're seeing in just the headlines of this other stuff, which if you're an individual, that should, again, further validate why it's important for you to stay up to date on some of this stuff. But for companies, it should also help you realize there is a very, very diverse opportunity of what we can do with this. And this just further goes to why, just because you've purchased Gemini or, Copilot doesn't mean you have AI successfully working. And there's a whole ecosystem of things, which is why you need smart people who are capable and know how to use AI effectively in your organization. You can't just trust like we just threw a big model in and now we're good to go. I mean, no, you need people there who are driving all this other stuff. So that's a little bit of what's going on in the model space and model enhancements. Let's talk about Google Mangle next. So Google Mangle, if you aren't familiar, it's not completely brand new, but they recently are making headlines for really what they developed was a programming language that can, the best easy way to describe it is it can look across all of your databases and treat it like a single database. And this is a huge breakthrough, which again, whether you're an individual or a company, you should care about this kind of stuff. Now, you might go, well, Christopher, why? Like, why is this such a big deal? One of the biggest gaps, and part of why in things like MIT's data of specialized, AI projects, why we're seeing such high failure rates is the fact that work is complicated. It's extremely complicated, and it's spread out across tons of different systems, lots of different things happening left and right. And so all of that data is managed and housed by different systems. It's managed and housed in different databases. Not all of those databases are consistent in the way they do the work they do. These applications, these workflows end up splitting off into different, databases and different apps and all this stuff. So it becomes very hard. So you may say, hey, we want AI to optimize our workflow. Well, part of why AI struggles is it can't necessarily always effectively go into all of this stuff. And as much as you'd say, well, can't the agent just do it? No, like most people can't do it. And AI has to be trained on something. So it really struggles. Now, what Google Mangle does is they've designed it's basically like a programming language in many ways. But what it does is it allows developers to write programs that can actually go in and speak to all these different applications, all these different databases, and query and work along it as though it's one thing. So it's almost like if you were to, I guess the best way I can describe this is think of all these different databases and applications like people from different countries that speak different languages. Okay. Let's say you bring them in a room, and historically they've all been like working to a single outcome, but there's been different handoffs and different translators involved and all this other stuff. And so you can imagine work's really complicated. What Google Mangle is claiming, like, again, we'll see where it goes, is we've now created a universal interpreter that not only can interpret all the different languages, but allows you to just sit on the other end and basically say, here's what I'm trying to do. And it can go in and see across all these different databases, across these different workflows, and make sense of all this. So it can do all that interpretation for you. That's what they're claiming. Okay. Now, is it going to deliver on all of that? It's hard to say. But if it works as well as it's claiming to work, this would significantly improve the capability, and this would actually benefit organizations, not only people, but AI. People waste tons of time on this. Like I said, imagine you threw a bunch of people speaking different languages, all working together on the same project, and you had them all in the same room, and you were like, all right, let's streamline this operation. I mean, it would be an absolute nightmare, right? I think anybody can kind of recognize what that would look like. Now, if you could get everybody in that same room to speak the same language and basically understand how all the pieces fit together, you can imagine how much quicker you'd be able to go, well, how do we optimize this? How do we improve it? Where do we make changes? How do we, see if there's things that we can do better? That actually is beneficial to people and what companies can do from an AI standpoint. Now, naturally, where this is being positioned is, many people are positioning this as like, this is a kind of job ender, because once AI can see cleanly across all these different applications and disparate databases, there will be no need for people in the mix. I think that's a misinterpretation of what this can do. It still grossly underestimates the complexity of what's there. And you still lack all the context. Just because AI can see everything and pull it together, someone still has to make sense of that. And so you're still going to need people. This is where sometimes it's positioned as, well, now all you'll need is the person on the one end who can just now query, Mangle and get all the data back that it needs and then make all these decisions. Like, wrong. You still need people who understand the context, who can actually work across this. But what this does do is allow business decision makers much greater informed access into how this stuff works and how things fit together. It also does, yes, open up a lot more room for companies to be able to implement something like an AI agent to be able to work across functions, where before it would just, get stuck on the loading screen because it can't make sense of something that broke over here. Mango would be able to allow it to do more. But I think we just need to be really careful that, again, with stuff like this, we don't go, oh, perfect. So now that we can see everything, there's no reason for people to be involved. That's just not the case. That's not how work happens. And Mangle in and of itself is a whole programming language that would need developers to be able to understand what to do, how to connect the dots, how to hook this up, how to teach it to look across all these things, how to write all the programs and things like that to be able to do this stuff. So it's never as simple as Google Mango releases this is the end of human labor. And it bugs me when I see that kind of stuff, because it shows, one, how little we understand the technology, and two, how little we understand work. So is Google Mangle a significant breakthrough? Yes, it's a significant breakthrough. And it's something that I think, companies everywhere should be perking up to. Now, is Google the only one, trying to do some of this? Not necessarily. There's other specialized companies that can specialize in this. But this kind of thing, if we had a universal language to be able to do this, would absolutely speed up and streamline and, error reduce. And we'd see an increase in those like 5%, just because you'd actually be able to talk across applications and databases. So big development. Yes. Is it a world ender? Should somebody go out and go, oh gosh, if we get Google Mangle, we need to be afraid, for the future of what we're doing, or, this is going to magically fix everything. No, it's not. It's not. So don't treat it as such. So that's what Google Mangle is, why you should care about it, what it could mean for the future of things, all that good stuff. But more to come on that as things continue to break down. On a concluding note, I'll just kind of wrap this up with really something that I've been working on recently that has just been, it's proven to be really effective. And it goes back to something that I talked about in the MIT study, where it says, 95% of these specialized AI projects fail. So this was within an operations group that was looking to streamline some of the work that the operations team was working on. And when I say operations, in this case, it was sales operations. So they were looking at some of the work that was happening within sales to be able to translate what was going on with customer data and actually put that back in a database and work through that, and then allow kind of their sales operations teams to work with it. So relatively specialized. And again, you had to look at like, how is this happening today? Because you had your sales teams that were putting their notes in, I'm not going to talk vendors and all this other stuff because it's too specific, but basically they're putting all their sales notes in one area. This is where they're doing their stuff. Well, that wasn't necessarily connected to the data base that they were looking at. And then their analytics platform was somewhere else. And then there was another system in the mix. And so there was a lot of stuff going on. And as a result, data was broken. It was hard to get, things like that. There was a lot of requests. So lots of manual time spent, one, constantly trying to clean data, then trying to make reports, doing all this. It truly was a mess. And this analytics team, the sales operations analytics team, was completely overwhelmed. And so what we were able to do was we're able to actually go in and, similar to some of the stuff I talked about with Google Mangle, use AI to actually query and scrape some of this data and then be able to analyze and clean it up, translate it, and move it over into this other database that could then be used by the organization for a lot of the reports. Now, I know I'm not getting hyper specific in this, but largely going back to like what we did to do all this, we actually had to understand how this stuff worked. Like initially, the project had actually started as a failed project because they had tried to implement an agent that would just do all of this. And I got brought in because it wasn't working, but they knew there was potential with this. And as we dug into it, many of the same gaps that I talked about were missing. There wasn't clear understanding of what we were trying to do. And there definitely wasn't an understanding of how the work happened today. And not just the work in the analytics team, the operational analytics team. In that, there wasn't an understanding of how the data was being captured by the frontline sales team. What the context of that data, all of a sudden, it was just a bunch of raw data. And granted, the agent they had before was able to pull all of that and try and contextualize it. But because nobody had taken the time to understand how the sales team was gathering data, what relevance the data had, kind of the practices within the sales team, the AI had no context for what it was gathering. It could find patterns, but those patterns didn't mean what they meant. And so what you ran into was the analytics team was generating reports based on what the agent had scraped and kind of pulled together into stuff. Then, of course, the frontline sales teams are like flipping out because they're like, what do you do? That's not what that means. Like, that is not what's going on. Where are you getting this information? Which, of course, then causes major conflict between the head of sales enablement and head of sales operations, because sales operations is presenting stuff, and you can imagine how this stuff blows up really quick. But the reason I wanted to share this was a specialized AI project. It was something where you couldn't just say, well, can't we just use Gemini to do all this stuff? You couldn't. We needed to actually build a specialized AI tool that could capture, translate, migrate this data, then could repurpose it, put it in the right system where it could be worked with, and then be used to generate the kinds of reports. And the AI kind of sat in between to be able to do all this stuff. But out of the gate, it would have fallen into the 95% failed projects. Once we took the time to understand what happened, understand the people involved in this, actually dug into this, figured out where the AI could really help with things and where they needed people in the loop to kind of cross-check, make sure this stuff was working, we were able to get quite a bit of efficiency out of things and dramatically reduce the workload of these poor analysts who are just spending all this time going back and forth and dealing with getting screamed and yelled at because that's not the right data. Why did you get that? Then they've got to go try and reverse engineer where they got it from. Now they're able to actually just talk to AI if something comes up and figure out, hey, where did this come from? What was broken down? Where was there a mix up? And then continue improving and iterating on it. So overall, it's been a really successful project, but we didn't just throw AI at it and it magically worked. And I just continue to want to drive this. And then we were also able to, we later on, once we realized, hey, this is going to go further, started working on how do we actually assess that people are capable of using AI well, because there's just a whole lot of things that layer in later. So there's just another story to try and counterbalance this idea that, like, one, it's an easy button, or two, it's coming for everybody's jobs. Every single project I engage with, it just continues to validate, like, that's not the case. That's not how this stuff works. So that's kind of the rundown for this week. I hope you found this helpful. Again, there's just a lot going on, and my goal is to help make sense of this for regardless of what position you're in. And hopefully I've done my job today. Hope you have a great rest of your day and a great weekend whenever you happen to listen to this, and we will see you on the other side.